Last Thanksgiving, my mom stood up in the middle of a luxury ski resort in Aspen. She raised her champagne glass and turned my whole life into a punchline. I have 2 daughters, she announced, smiling at the room. One is a famous lawyer, and the other is basically a beggar. The table exploded with laughter while chairs creaked and glasses clinked. Someone actually snorted, and I felt every eye slide over me down my thrift store sweater to the worn sneakers I'd thrown on after a 12-hour shift. Remember when she said she'd be a star athlete, someone joked. Then another voice chimed in saying at least she knows how to sleep on the couch. My own father added, "You're lucky we haven't kicked you out yet," like it was the funniest thing he'd said all year. I didn't cry and I didn't yell. I just wrapped my fingers around my grandmother's necklace and felt the cool metal against my skin. I pushed my chair back and walked out of that perfect postcard dining room without a word. Nobody followed me, and nobody even called my name. But if you want to know what happened in the 1 week between their laughter and their panic, when their bank account suddenly froze, stay with me until the end, when I got back to my tiny apartment in Denver. That night I dropped my suitcase by the door and just stood there in the dark. I could still hear their laughter echoing in my head. My mom Linda calling me a beggar in front of a room full of relatives. My dad George doubling down like it was some kind of comedy roast. And my older sister Natalie sitting there in her perfect blazer, not saying a single word to stop it. My brother Luke was smirking, like always, acting like this was just another family joke I should be used to. And the truth is, I am used to it. I grew up in a house where Natalie's trophies lived in their own glass cabinet, and my soccer medals got tossed in a shoebox in the garage. She was the one with the straight A's and the law school plan, while Luke was the kid everyone called a natural leader. I was just the kid who drew logos in the margins of my homework and begged for a cheap laptop so I could teach myself design and coding from YouTube. Every time I mentioned building an app, my parents would smile and say that's cute, or maybe keep a real job just in case. When I blew my knee in high school and my shot at a college soccer scholarship disappeared, the way they talk about it now, you'd think it was just another example of me quitting. They forget the surgery and the rehab and the nights I cried because my whole identity had shifted in a single bad landing. Over time, the comments got sharper at family dinners. Mom would say if you worked half as hard as Natalie, you'd be fine by now. And Dad would shake his head and tell people Riley is still trying to figure herself out. Like, I wasn't sitting right there, so when they laughed at me in Aspen, it wasn't new. It was just the moment I finally realized that in their version of our family story, I was never going to be anything but the failure they pointed at to make themselves feel better. After I left the resort, I drove through the mountains in silence. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise and went out for a run in the cold Denver air. With every step, I replayed their words. The jokes about me being broke and the digs about maybe next year I'll finally make some real money. The little comments that sound harmless if you only hear one but start to crush you when you've heard them for a decade. Somewhere between mile 2 and mile 3, something snapped into place. Not anger exactly, but a switch flipping from please love me to you don't get to talk about me like that anymore. I stopped on the sidewalk with my heart pounding and knew 2 things with total clarity. 1, I was done auditioning for a role in their perfect little success story. And 2, I had been the one quietly keeping their lives from falling apart for years, and they had no idea. They sat there in Aspen calling me a beggar while living off safety nets I had built behind the scenes. So I straightened up and made a decision to stop fixing, stop funding, and let the numbers tell the truth they refused to hear from my mouth. Most people in my family think I deliver food and design pretty buttons for random apps when I can't sleep. That's the version of my life they're comfortable with because it fits their story about me being the messy, unstable one. The real version started 6 years ago in a cramped co-working space in downtown Denver with flickering lights and suspicious air vents. I was 22 and sitting across from a guy named Noah Park who believed in my brain more than my own parents ever had. He looked at my whiteboard of ideas and said, freelancers are terrible with money, so what if you build something that thinks about it for them? And that was how Loop Nest was born. It started as an app that tracks income from different clients and automates bill payments, letting you set up rules like if my account drops below this number, pause extra payments. I handled design and user flows, coding late at night until my eyes burned, while Noah handled growth and calling scary financial people so I didn't have to. At first we had like 10 users, but slowly a YouTuber mentioned us and a small business newsletter featured us. We added features and hired a tiny team and brought in an accountant while a local fintech blog wrote about the app built by a Denver girl in a hoodie. But my mom never read that article because she doesn't follow that kind of thing. Somewhere in the middle of all this, my family started having little emergencies. Luke's boutique gym in Dallas got hit by a burst pipe one winter, flooding the front studio. Insurance covered some of it, but not all, and he had a balloon payment on a loan coming up, so he called me half drunk, complaining he might have to close. Natalie, the star lawyer in Los Angeles, had taken on a huge civil rights case that ate up her time and money, racking up legal costs on her own card before the firm reimbursed her. She had a nanny to pay and rent on a very nice apartment, plus student loans still gnawing at her every month. My parents were quietly drowning in their mortgage and medical bills, pretending everything was fine even when Mom started cutting coupons again. To the rest of the world, they were all doing great, but to me, with access to the numbers they shared in late-night phone calls, they were held together by duct tape and denial. That's where Loop Nest came in. One night, staring at all the features we'd built for strangers, I added new rules for my own accounts. Extra income from my biggest contracts didn't go to clothes or vacations, it went to a folder inside Loop Nest called Family Safety Net that split into 4 sub-accounts covering Luke's gym debt, Natalie's credit costs, my parents' mortgage, and Aunt Brenda's business loan. Using the same tools my users had, I created automated payments from my personal account straight to whatever bills were screaming the loudest. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was a martyr, but because I knew exactly how it would go if I did. They would politely thank me at first, then they would expect it, and then they would rewrite the story so that my help became a background detail. So instead, I let the app do the talking. I set a rule to cover shortfalls in Luke's gym lease if his revenue dipped, and I paid down part of Natalie's high-interest card every month so her balance stopped climbing. I made sure my parents' mortgage never hit more than 30 days late, pushing payments through right before penalties kicked in. Over 5 years, those little emergency boosts added up to about $360,000 worth of little money I could have used to buy a house or travel. I tracked every cent in Loop Nest, and every time I watched a red bar turn yellow or green because of my transfers, I felt this twisted mixture of pride and shame. Pride because I had built something powerful enough to change people's lives, and shame because I was using that power on people who still called me a failure in public. When Mom stood in Aspen and called me a beggar, she did it in a jacket she'd bought on a credit card that hadn't been sent to collections yet because of a payment I'd scheduled. When Luke bragged about bouncing back after a flood, his rebound was literally paid for by the girl he said was allergic to stability. Standing in my apartment after that trip, I opened my laptop and logged into Loop Nest, pulling up the family safety net dashboard, 4 columns and 4 names with a total that made my stomach twist. My finger hovered over the rules I'd written for auto transfers and rounding up spare income. My chest hurt, not from anger, but from this bone-deep exhaustion. I had been their invisible safety net for years, and in return, they still saw me as a joke. So very calmly, I started turning things off one by one. I disabled the rules and canceled future transfers, resetting my own threshold so extra money would finally stay in my account instead of bleeding into theirs. I didn't delete any records, and I didn't touch their login or hack anything. I just removed myself from the equation, and Loop Nest pinged a quiet confirmation sound each time I hit save. To anyone else, it would have been nothing, but to me, it was the sound of a rope being cut. Somewhere down the line, bills would come due, and for the first time in years, I wouldn't be there to silently pay them. They wanted to call me a beggar, so fine. Let's see how their perfect lives hold up without the beggar's money propping them. The first alert came the very next week, early on a Thursday morning when the sky over Denver was still gray. My phone buzzed on the nightstand at 6 in the morning with a text from Mom saying her card just got declined at Starbucks and asking if there was something wrong with the bank. I stared at the message for a long time, knowing that for years Loop Nest would have quietly covered the gap. But now with those rules gone, reality was finally catching up, so I put the phone face down and went to brush my teeth. By 7 there were 3 more messages and a missed call with Mom spiraling, saying the app keeps saying insufficient funds and they just got a notice about the mortgage being late again. My chest pinched a little at her mentioning autopay, as if the universe itself had been taking care of them, not their youngest daughter sitting in a cramped office at midnight. At 8 in the morning, Dad's name flashed on my screen, and I picked up the second time, holding the phone to my ear without saying anything. His voice snapped, breathless, asking if I had any idea what was going on with the investments, because the account said our funds transfer didn't go through this month. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the wall, hearing the assumption that if something was wrong, I had broken it. I told him I didn't do anything and asked if he paid. His bills with his own money. There was a quiet beat on the line before he shot back, "Don't be smart with me. We've never had problems like this before." He listed the mortgage being flagged and the credit card payment bouncing and the retirement account being frozen for risk assessment, saying that doesn't just happen out of nowhere. I remembered clicking those disable rule buttons one after another, until the family safety net dashboard went, still knowing it happened from right here in my apartment with my own hand. I told him maybe he should ask his bank since he's always in the one in control, and hung up before he could answer. My hands were shaking, but underneath the tremor was relief because for the first time, the weight around my neck wasn't the necklace, it was the debt I had never signed up for. By 10 in the morning, my phone was a storm of notifications, including a screenshot from Natalie of a bank email, saying her accounts were being temporarily frozen until she cleared an outstanding balance. She texted asking if I messed with anything and saying if this is a punishment for the other night. It isn't funny because she has court this week. Anger bubbled so hot it felt like static in my ears, because she assumed I had hacked into her life, just to inconvenience her instead of spending 5 years steering her away from financial disaster. I typed out 3 responses and deleted all of them, settling on silence, because it felt more accurate than any paragraph I could send. At 11, a voicemail came in from Mom, and her voice was nothing like the performative hostess at the resort. It was smaller and cracked at the edges as she begged me to call back, saying the mortgage company threatened foreclosure and Dad's retirement account was locked. She said Natalie's cards were being reviewed and Luke was saying something about the gym lease and she didn't understand what was happening. She ended it by saying, "Whatever this is, we know we were wrong at dinner." Okay, we were just joking, please, where are you? I listened to it twice, once with my heart hearing my scared mom realizing the ground wasn't solid, and once with my head hearing years of minimized apologies. I replayed Aspen in my mind and the champagne and the laughter and Dad saying I was lucky they hadn't kicked me out. Then I hit record and kept my voice calm, asking, "Who are you? Do I know you? Why should I help?" I sent the message and set the phone down next to my keyboard, feeling my hands steady now because the joke had stopped. Paying their bills. I thought the messages would slow down after that, but they didn't. They multiplied, and by Friday afternoon my phone looked like a fire alarm with missed calls from Mom and Dad and Natalie and even Luke. I muted the family group chat. After Mom sent a long paragraph about misunderstandings, followed immediately by asking if I knew why the electric bill bounced this month, noting that the account used to be in good standing. On Saturday, I was in the parking lot of a grocery store dropping off an order when my phone buzzed with a notification from the building's front camera showing Mom and Dad standing outside my apartment door, bundled in coats. They had flown in from Sacramento without telling me, and for a second watching them on my screen, the old guilt tugged at me. That little voice saying, "Let them in and fix it." Then I remembered Mom standing in front of a room calling me a beggar with a smile, and Dad saying I was lucky they hadn't kicked me out. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and drove to my next delivery, later playing the audio from the intercom, where Mom whispered she's not answering, what if something happened to her? And Dad muttered nothing happened to her, she's just being dramatic and probably did something with the accounts and now she's hiding. The idea that I was some reckless hacker breaking things for attention would have been funny if it weren't coming from the same man whose mortgage I'd been saving for years. That night I was at my usual coffee shop working through a client's onboarding flow when someone knocked on my table. I looked up and saw Natalie and my dad standing there, too sharply dressed for the chipped mugs around us. My stomach dropped, realizing Mom must have dug through old emails to find an invoice and track the address. Natalie asked, "Can we sit?" but didn't wait for an answer, sliding into the chair across from me, like this was a scheduled meeting. My dad glanced at my open laptop where the Loop Nest dashboard was up, but I quickly tabbed to a generic wireframe saying freelance stuff, you know, the unstable life of a beggar. Natalie flinched a little but straightened her spine, saying we need to talk about what's happening because the timing is suspicious. I took a sip of my cold coffee, asking what timing, and Dad leaned forward, listing Mom's card being declined and the foreclosure warning and the issues with his retirement account and Natalie's frozen cards, plus Aunt Brenda's business line of credit being under review, saying it all started right after I stormed out in Aspen. And that is one hell of a coincidence. There it was again, the assumption that my anger was the problem, not their entire way of treating me. I asked if they think I'm sitting in Denver hacking every bank in America when I barely get my own groceries delivered on time. Natalie exhaled sharply, saying no one said hacking, but noting I've always been good with tech and helped her set up stuff in LA. She suggested maybe I change something. I shouldn't have, or maybe I'm angry and using access to teach them a lesson. Her tone tried to sound legal, but underneath I heard fear because she wasn't used to being on the side of the table, where she didn't have all the information. I told them I don't have access to their accounts and never did, saying if your life is spinning because a few automatic transfers stopped may be the issue. Isn't me, maybe it's that you've been living on money you never knew was there. Dad frowned, asking what that means, and I looked at him, really seeing the tired lines in his forehead. For a second I almost softened, but then I thought about how easily he humiliated me, so I told him it means you should probably call your financial institutions and ask them who's been making sure your lights stay on. Dad slammed his palm lightly on the table, rattling my cup, saying, you don't get to talk in riddles, Riley, we are your family. I felt the necklace under my shirt and thought about that word family, which had been used to excuse every dig and every joke. I packed my laptop slowly and stood up, saying I have a meeting, and if you really want answers, you're not going to get them by ambushing me in coffee shops and accusing me of crimes. Natalie demanded. Then how? And her voice cracked with vulnerability. So I paused, thinking for once I had leverage. I told them Thursday at 7 in the evening at the same place. Bring Mom and Luke and whoever else thinks I ruined their life, because if you want to understand what's going on, everyone needs to be in the same room and actually shut up long enough to hear me. Dad narrowed his eyes, asking why Thursday, and I replied because I said so. You've been running my life on your schedule for 28 years, so you can clear one evening for me. Natalie glanced at Dad, then back at me and said, fine, we'll be here. They left and I sat back down with my heart pounding until my phone lit up with a text from my nephew, Mason, saying he didn't think the joke at Thanksgiving was funny and asking if I could teach him some coding because he uses my app with friends and thinks it's brilliant. Thursday at 7, the coffee shop felt smaller than usual, like the walls had leaned in to listen. I got there early and took the table in the corner near the back, watching the door while pretending to rearrange screens on my laptop. Noah sat a few tables away with his own computer headphones around his neck, pretending to work, but obviously on standby. We had talked the night before, making sure we were covered on every detail. The bell over the door jingled at 7:02, and my parents walked in first, stiff and tense, followed by Natalie in a dark blazer like she had come straight from court. Luke was in a gym hoodie with Aaron right behind him, and Aunt Brenda was wringing her hands in the back while Mason slipped in last, looking nervous. They all crowded around my table like a jury, and for a second no one said anything. Then my mom broke the silence, forcing a smile that did not reach her eyes, saying, Riley, thank you for meeting with us. We just want to understand what is going on. My dad did not bother with soft, he just snapped, cut to the chase. Did you mess with our accounts or not? I looked at each of them one by one, the people I had been breaking myself to protect, and said, no, I did not touch your accounts. I did not hack anything. All I did was stop using my money to prop up a life you could not afford. Confusion rippled around the table, and Natalie frowned, asking, what are you talking about, your money? You do not have that kind of money, you are always saying. You are broke. I answered, I say I am broke because after paying my own rent and bills, I sent almost everything extra to you. I turned my laptop around so they could see the dashboard on the screen, showing loop nests with my colors and my layout, and 4 columns labeled with their names. I said, this is where your emergencies went to be fixed. For a long moment, all they did was stare until Luke leaned closer, squinting, and asked, wait, is that my gym lease number? Why is that in your app? I told him because when your revenue dipped after the flood, I set up an automatic rule so that whenever your account dropped below a certain line, my income covered the difference. Otherwise, you would have defaulted 2 winters ago. Natalie blurted out, that is not possible. Mom and Dad helped him, not you. I said Mom and Dad were barely holding their own mortgage together. Check the dates. Every time you thought a miracle payment came through, it was not a miracle. It was me. I clicked to the next column, showing her name and a list of credit card payments and nanny invoices that had been topped up at the last second, keeping her balances from going into full crisis. I told them I had been using my app to route my own money into your messes for years, including Luke's gym and your cards and Aunt Brenda's loan. Every time you said the bank gave us a grace period, that grace period had my name on it. You just did not know. Aunt Brenda made a small sound like someone had knocked the wind out of her, and my mom's face crumpled while Natalie stared at the screen, her cheeks flushing, asking, why would you do that and not tell anyone? I shrugged, feeling tired, saying because I knew exactly how it would go if I did. You would be grateful at first, then you would expect it, and then you would rewrite it in your head so that my help was just background noise. Natalie straightened, slipping into her louder voice, saying, regardless of your intentions, there is a serious issue here. You used financial information we shared with you to create this system, and a court might see that as leverage. Meaning at minimum you owe us equity. That was the twist. They had come here not just scared, but armed, deciding that my work belonged to them. Noah's eyes flashed, but his voice stayed calm as he stepped in, saying, just. So we are clear, you are suggesting that the person who has been secretly paying your bills for years should now give you part of the company. My dad bristled, saying, we are not saying entitled, we are saying this is a family effort. I leaned back in my chair, very done with pretending this was reasonable, saying, you did not trust me, you pitied me. The only time you thought about ownership was when the money stopped coming. Noah spoke up, saying, you are a little late on the equity conversation anyway, because we signed a term sheet last month. A fund out of San Francisco is buying a majority stake in Loop Nest, and their legal team has gone through every cent. So if you file anything claiming you have a right to the company, you are not going to get a payout. You are going to get letters asking why you think you deserve to profit from money you did not earn. Silence slammed over the table, and Luke's mouth fell open while Aunt Brenda whispered something in Spanish. My mom stared at me like she was seeing a stranger, and Natalie looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under her, saying, you sold the company, you did all this and never told us. I nodded, saying, it is my company and my risk. I told the people who supported me. Luke's voice came out sharp, saying, so this is your revenge. You let us drown while you cash out and play the victim. I met his stare without flinching, saying, this is me stepping out of the way of the consequences you created. You borrowed more than you could pay back and spent like the money would always magically show up. But I was the magic and I turned it off. Mason finally spoke up, his voice small but clear, saying, you guys, I've been using Loop Nest with my friends and it's brilliant. She did something real and you cannot just act like she owes you because you are embarrassed now. Natalie shot him a warning look, but he did not back down. For a moment, nobody seemed to know what to say because the power dynamic had shifted so far, it was unrecognizable. My dad sat there with his jaw clenched and my mom's eyes were glossy with guilt and fear, so I closed my laptop and said, here is what is going to happen next. I told them nothing happens for a while. The transfers are off and staying off, and you are not going to get a piece of a company you never believed in. You are going to go home and deal with your banks like every other adult. I stood up and said, if any of you want to talk again after that, really talk, not yell or accuse. We can set up a time in my office on my terms. Until then, we are done. I walked away, hearing my mom's voice break, asking me to wait, but I touched my necklace and kept walking because for years, family had meant I was the one who had to bend. The following Monday, I met them in the Loop Nest office in downtown Denver, with floor-to-ceiling windows and whiteboards covered in diagrams. I clicked a remote and a big screen lit up with revenue graphs and a timeline of user growth plus a calendar showing late nights they used to call wasting my 20s. Then I laid out the numbers that hurt. 4 folders sat on the table, each with a name containing printed summaries of every transfer I had made for them, totaling over $360,000. The room went very quiet as they flipped through the pages. My mom cried, tracing a line item for a roof repair she thought insurance covered, and Natalie went sheet by sheet, realizing how much debt would have exploded without those payments. I told them this is not a guilt trip. This is a record of what actually happened underneath the version you tell at dinner tables. Mom wiped her cheeks, whispering, why didn't you come to us? And I said, because for a long time I thought you were right. I thought if I just proved myself a little more, you would finally see me as something other than a disappointment. Luke looked up with glossy eyes, saying, we did not know, and I replied, you never asked because you liked me small. It made you feel bigger. Gave them their choices, saying Luke can sell part of his gym to deal with his debt honestly, and I will lend him my time to structure it, but not my money. To Natalie, I said, you can sit down with a financial planner I connect you with and pay them yourself. And if you ever joke about me being a beggar again, I will block your number. To my parents, I said, you need to talk to a counselor to unlearn the idea that success only looks like a law degree. And if you do the work, I will consider showing up for holidays again, maybe. Then I turned to Mason and said, if you still want to learn to code, you can intern here after school and sit in on product meetings. His face lit up, saying, yeah, I want that. When the meeting ended, there were no big group hugs, but the fantasy that I was a screw-up was gone, replaced by a Messier truer picture. Months passed, and the sale of Loop Nest went through. I signed the documents with my hands steady and moved into a bigger apartment, buying furniture that wasn't falling apart. I Didn't go back for Thanksgiving that year. Instead, I went hiking in the snow outside Denver. I turned my phone on silent when Mason sent me screenshots of his code and smiled. What I have learned is that family is not a free pass to treat someone. Like a punchline, love without respect is just control in a nicer outfit. Cutting them off financially was about finally stepping out from under their shadows and letting cause and effect do what it always does. My consequence was building something real, and theirs was never imagining that the person they called a beggar might be the one holding the net.